At the time of Jesus, just outside the walls of Jerusalem, there was an abandoned quarry. It's a site that's actually inside the walls of the old city. I think I've mentioned this before in a sermon already since I've been here at Holy Trinity. The walls have been rebuilt and expanded multiple times over the centuries, and so that site is now inside the walls. And one approaches this spot in the old city of Jerusalem, some might call it, the center of the universe, by passing Jerusalem's oldest bakery, Mr. Zalatimo's sweet shop. There are a whole host of other Zalatimo sweet shops in the world, and especially around Jerusalem. They are all copies of the original. And the sweet shop, it's famous not only for its mutabak, which is a Palestinian cheese-filled phyllo dough pastry delight, but it also contains the remnants of the Church of Helena, or some of the remnants of the Church of Helena, who was the Emperor Constantine's mother, who had the first church built on the site of Christ's crucifixion and resurrection built. It's a strange place to build a church, over an abandoned quarry. The stone worth using had long since been extracted by the time of Jesus, and what was left wasn't suitable for building. And so the Romans had chosen this useless piece of real estate as a favorite spot for their executions. And so it is there, in the place of the stone that the builders had rejected, that our Lord, the stone that the builders rejected, became the chief cornerstone of a new creation. In Mark's account of the Passion that we hear today, in this year in our lectionary cycle, there are several women who are said to be standing at a distance watching the events that are taking place on Golgotha, watching Christ's death on the cross in this abandoned quarry. And they don't run and they don't hide like it seems all the disciples have done, at least all the male disciples. They don't throw themselves on the ground in recognition of the horror of the moment. They simply stand, it says, gazing at Jesus on the cross. One author, Ron Rolheiser, describes this gospel account in which Mary, Jesus' mother, stands at the foot of the cross, and he asks, what was Mary, and for our purposes, all the other women as well, doing under the cross, if not protesting and fighting the situation? And here, if you'll forgive me, I'll quote him at some length. Mary couldn't stop the crucifixion, but she could stop some of the hatred, the bitterness, the jealousy, the heartlessness and anger that caused it and which surround it. And she helped stop these by refusing to give back in kind, by transforming rather than transmitting them, by swallowing hard and literally eating them rather than giving them back as everyone else was doing. Had Mary, in righteousness and outrage, begun to scream hysterically, shout angrily at those crucifying Jesus, or physically tried to attack someone as they were driving the nails into Jesus' hands, she would have been caught up in the same energy as everyone else, replicating the same anger and bitterness that caused the crucifixion to begin with. What Mary was doing under the cross, her silence and seeming unwillingness to protest notwithstanding, was radiating all that is antithetical to the crucifixion: gentleness, understanding, forgiveness, peace, light. Rolheiser continues, and that's not easy to do. Most everything inside us demands justice, screams for it, and refuses to remain silent in the presence of injustice. That's a healthy instinct, and sometimes acting on it is good. We need at times to protest, to shout, to literally throw ourselves into the face of injustice and do everything in our power to stop the crucifixion. But there are times, too, he writes, when things have gone so far that shouts and protests are no longer helpful. Darkness is going to have its hour, come what may. And all we can do is to stand under the cross and help eat its bitterness by refusing to conduct its energy. In those situations, like Mary, we have to say, I can't stop this crucifixion, but I can stop some of the hatred, the bitterness, the jealousy, the brute heartlessness, and darkness that surround it. I can't stop this, but I will not conduct its hatred. You know, as we look at all of the injustice around us, all of the violence done in the world to our brothers and sisters, all the violence of prejudice, of judgment, and fear committed against our brothers and sisters, not just around the world, but here in our own community, in our own backyards, we know that we cannot stop it all. However, we can choose to stop it with us. This Christianity business is not for the faint of heart. This week is a special reminder of that. There is real sacrifice involved. It is not all about pleasantness and feeling good and feeling like we've gotten something out of it. Church is not primarily a place to go to get something, but to give something. There is real vitriol that is directed our way. Will we contribute our own brand of vitriol and violence, or will we stop the destructive behavior by standing firm against it, even if we do so without saying a word? Those who had waved the palms of victory for Christ's entry into Jerusalem quickly had to reevaluate what victory would mean when the one that they had hailed as king was killed. The earliest Christian witnesses to the faith also had to reevaluate what victory would look like for them in face of violence and persecution. Those earliest martyrs for the faith laid down their lives rather than spoil it by succumbing to the demands of their rulers. The palms that were waved as Christ entered to Jerusalem on the way to his own death became a sign of victory for the martyrs, victory over the violence of this world. A little bit of violence died with each martyr. Yet the martyrs themselves live on. We proclaim in our liturgies of Holy Week that Christ has triumphed over violence. And we stand with those women watching at the cross, refusing to give in to the violence that created that situation. And we remember all those who have walked more closely to Christ's own footsteps than we might care to follow, even giving their lives in witness to Christ's own death. And so in these liturgies of Holy Week, in our own witness of Christ's death, difficult as it may be to bear at times, we remind the world that violence will not have the last word.